There is a silent, agonizing tragedy unfolding behind the closed doors of millions of modern homes every single night. You know the exact, suffocating sensation. It is the profound, secret pain of being in a relationship that looks absolutely perfect on paper, yet feels entirely dead in the flesh. You split the bills perfectly. You divide the household chores down the middle. You communicate with logical precision. You have successfully built a perfectly functioning, equal partnership. But when the lights go out and you lie next to them in the dark, the magnetic spark that once consumed you both has vanished into a flat, exhausting gray line. You realize with a cold sweat that you are no longer sleeping next to a passionate lover. You are sleeping next to a highly efficient business partner. You are just two tired roommates managing the logistics of existence. But the sovereign mind must look at this silent tragedy through the unforgiving lens of physics and human neurobiology. Your relationship is not failing because you have fallen out of love, or because human beings are not meant to stay together. It is failing because a modern mental virus has completely hacked your biology. Society has fed you a catastrophic lie. You were taught that to achieve respect, peace, and harmony, you and your partner must become exactly equal in your energetic output and behavioral roles. But the absolute law of physics dictates that when two magnetic poles are perfectly identical, they do not attract. They violently repel each other. The absence of polarity means the absolute absence of electricity. You have unconsciously castrated the profound magnetism of your union in the name of sameness. Today, we will dismantle this devastating social conditioning. We will reveal the 4 laws of magnetic polarity that govern all human attraction. Pay absolute, undivided attention to the discourse today, because the 4th and final law, the law of sovereign surrender, is the exact terrifying coordinate where 99% of modern relationships starve to death, because it requires the absolute assassination of your modern pride. If you are ready to drop the illusion of sameness and reclaim your fire, walk with me now. To resurrect the magnetic force of a dying connection, we must first step out of the sociological matrix and examine the raw, unfiltered architecture of the universe. This brings us to the first law, the illusion of sameness. In the desperate pursuit of a noble societal ideal, equal rights, equal respect, and equal opportunity, the modern world made a catastrophic foundational error. It confused equal value with identical function. We began to unconsciously believe that to be treated fairly, we must act, think, react, and operate exactly the same as our partner. We erased the divine friction of difference. But if we look to ancient Daoist philosophy, we understand that the entire cosmos is governed by the eternal swirling dance of Yin and Yang. You must deeply understand that Yin and Yang are not arbitrary societal roles, nor are they strictly bound to physical gender. They are the fundamental opposing energetic physics of reality itself. Yin is the vast, deep, chaotic, intuitive, and flowing energy. It is the raw feeling of life. Yang is the rigid, structured, penetrating, logical, and protective energy. It is the container that holds the life. To experience the profound, electrifying spark of intimacy, these two energies must collide in your living room, exactly as they do in the violent, beautiful forces of the universe. Let us examine this truth through the basic, undeniable mechanics of electrical physics. Consider the battery that powers the machinery of your daily life. For a light bulb to illuminate a dark room, it requires the continuous interaction of two completely different, opposing forces, a positive terminal and a negative terminal. It is the exact tension, the pulling distance between these two opposing poles, that generates the current. The greater the difference between the poles, the more violent and powerful the electrical charge. What happens when you take two positive terminals and forcefully smash them together in an attempt to make them equal? You do not get twice the amount of light. You get a catastrophic short circuit. There is no flow. There is only a sudden spark of violent friction, followed by a complete burnout. And what happens when you connect two negative terminals? You get absolute cold stagnation. The system is dead. When you bring the illusion of sameness into your romantic relationship, you are actively destroying the battery. You are demanding a short circuit. Look at the exhaustion of your own dynamic. When both partners are operating entirely in their yang energy, when both are trying to dominate the space, both are trying to lead the direction of the family, both are meticulously controlling the schedule, and both are rigidly refusing to yield a single inch of ground to the other, you create a double positive short circuit. Your home is no longer a sanctuary. It becomes a hostile war zone of two rams endlessly crashing their heavy horns together over trivial decisions. It is an exhausting, daily power struggle where no one ever rests. The armor is never taken off. You are two generals fighting over the same map, and in the crossfire, all biological intimacy is burned to ash. Conversely, look at the tragedy of the opposite extreme. When both partners completely abandon their structure and collapse into excessive yin energy, when both are waiting to be led, both are drowning in unregulated emotions, both are endlessly over-communicating their anxieties without taking action, and both are refusing to make a definitive decision or set a hard boundary, you create a double negative stagnation. The relationship stops being a dynamic journey and becomes a dark, sinking swamp. There is no forward momentum. There are no protective walls to keep the chaos of the world out. The union slowly drowns in a freezing sea of passive-aggressive resentment because neither partner is willing to stand up and be the solid ground. The neurobiological reality of human attraction is entirely unforgiving. Your primitive nervous system cannot be deeply, sexually, or romantically attracted to its own energetic mirror image. The human brain craves the contrast. The rigid structure desperately craves the wild chaos to feel alive, to feel moved, to feel human. And the wild chaos desperately craves the immovable structure to finally feel safe enough to rest. When you force yourselves to be identical companions, perfectly splitting every energetic task and emotional burden straight down the middle to maintain a facade of modern fairness, your primitive brain simply stops registering the other person as a magnetic force. They become safe. They become predictable. They become a sibling or a colleague. And magnetic attraction cannot survive in an environment of absolute predictability and identical function. To break this exhausting cycle, we must leave the realm of electricity and look to the magnificent, violent geography of the Earth itself. We must understand how these two opposing forces interact without ever trying to change each other. This brings us to the second law of magnetic polarity. We must step out of the modern mind, and we must stand at the edge of the world to witness the eternal collision of the mountain and the ocean. If you stand at the edge of a magnificent, violent coastline, you will bear witness to the ultimate, raw expression of magnetic polarity. You will not see two identical entities compromising with one another to achieve a state of flat, lifeless equality. You will see the eternal, breathtaking collision of two completely opposing forces that need each other to exist in their highest forms. You will see the mountain and the ocean. We must use this sovereign geography to understand the true nature of your internal ecosystem. The mountain represents the pure, untainted expression of yang energy. It is forged of dense, heavy stone. It is rooted deep into the core of the earth. The mountain does not move. It provides the definitive boundary, the unshakable container, and the silent, penetrating structure of the landscape. It does not react to every passing cloud or every change in the wind. Its entire biological mandate is to simply stand its ground and hold the perimeter. The ocean represents the profound, boundless expression of yin energy. It is fluid, deep, entirely chaotic, and terrifyingly powerful. It is the source of all life. The ocean is in a constant state of motion, feeling the gravitational pull of the moon, shifting with the tides, bringing nourishment, and harboring deep, dark mysteries beneath its surface. When the ocean is raging, when a massive emotional storm pulls the tide into a towering, chaotic wave, it violently crashes against the face of the mountain. We must look at this exact moment of impact with absolute clarity. Does the mountain apologize for being in the way? Does the mountain shrink, back down, or attempt to become fluid to match the water? Absolutely not. It stands in absolute terrifying stillness. It receives the full chaotic impact of the wave, and by simply holding its ground, it shatters the heavy wave into millions of beautiful, harmless drops of sparkling mist. Because the mountain absolutely refuses to move, the ocean intuitively knows it is safe to be wild. The ocean can express the full, terrifying magnitude of its storm precisely because it knows the rock will not break under its weight. The boundary creates the safety for the chaos to exist, and the mountain finds its ultimate, profound purpose in standing strong against the beautiful chaos of the water. This collision is the exact definition of magnetic attraction. Now, we must observe the catastrophic, neuro-linguistic programming of the modern era. Society has marched up to the mountain and whispered a toxic, castrating lie. It tells the yang energy, you are too rigid, you are too hard. To be a good modern partner, you must become more like the water. You must yield your boundaries to avoid conflict. You must be completely soft, endlessly accommodating, and you must apologize for your solid nature. And so, poisoned by the illusion of sameness, the mountain begins to apologize. It yields. It compromises its heavy structure in the name of artificial peace. It turns from solid stone into soft, unformed mud. Simultaneously, society marches to the edge of the wild, intuitive ocean and injects a freezing poison into its depths. It tells the yin energy, your chaotic emotion is a weakness. To be respected, to be an equal in this modern world, you must become a stone. You must build thick, impenetrable walls of independence. You must suppress your deep intuition, operate entirely in cold corporate logic, and you must never, ever rely on the mountain to hold you. And so, the ocean begins to freeze. The wild, flowing water turns into a massive, impenetrable, jagged glacier. Look at the living room of the modern relationship. You no longer have the beautiful, electrifying collision of the mountain and the ocean. You have a pile of soft, unformed mud sitting next to a cold, jagged block of ice. We must examine the devastating psychological fallout of this unnatural state. When the yang energy abdicates its throne of structure, when the partner who is energetically designed to hold the perimeter suddenly drops their shield and becomes passive just to avoid an argument, a profound biological panic ripples through the environment. The yin energy, the ocean, suddenly feels that the boundaries of the universe have disappeared. If there is no solid mountain to crash against, the water will simply flood the earth and destroy everything. To prevent this catastrophic flood, the yin energy is violently forced to step out of its natural flowing state. It feels an overwhelming, terrifying lack of safety in the environment. Therefore, it must rapidly freeze itself. It must artificially become the mountain just to keep the household from collapsing. This is the exact coordinate where bitter, exhausting resentment is born. The partner carrying the yin core is now operating entirely in a fabricated yang armor. They become hyper-vigilant, rigid, and intensely micromanaging. They begin to despise the partner who became mud. They do not despise them because they lack love. They despise them because the mud has forced the ocean to freeze. They are exhausted from having to be the man, the woman, the rock, and the water all at once. And the partner who became mud. They feel entirely emasculated, entirely useless, and profoundly unappreciated. They sacrifice their solid, penetrating nature because society told them that happy wife, happy life meant avoiding all conflict and agreeing to everything. They traded their sovereign structure for a fake, cowardly peace. And their reward is a partner who looks at them not with the burning, dilated eyes of magnetic desire, but with the cold, flat stare of a tired manager looking at an incompetent employee. You cannot negotiate desire. You cannot mandate physical attraction through a spreadsheet of equally divided chores. Attraction does not care about your modern political ideologies. Attraction is a primitive biological reflex. that responds exclusively to the tension of opposites. When the woman comes home from a brutal, exhausting day of operating in her masculine yang energy to survive the corporate world, she does not want to walk into a house and meet a man who is softer and more passive than she is. She desperately craves the mountain. She wants to drop her heavy iron armor at the door and finally collapse into a structure that is stronger than her own. And when the man returns from the battlefield, he does not want to lie down next to another rigid soldier. He craves the ocean. He craves the soft, flowing, rejuvenating depth that reminds him why he goes to war in the first place. By forcing both partners to meet in the exact gray middle of the spectrum, you have successfully eradicated the friction required for a spark. You have achieved equality, but you have assassinated the polarity. This unnatural state of existence does not merely ruin the romance of a relationship. It fundamentally poisons the human vessel. We are not just talking about the loss of intimacy. We are talking about the literal, chemical degradation of your internal organs. When a human being is forced to operate outside of their core biological polarity for an extended period of time, the body begins to attack itself. This brings us to the third law of magnetic polarity. We must confront the agonizing reality of the biological burnout. When society convinced you to abandon your natural magnetic polarity in the pursuit of absolute flat equality, it did not merely change your behavioral habits. It launched a direct chemical assault on your internal organs. The human vessel is not a blank slate that can be easily reprogrammed by modern sociological theories. It is an ancient, highly evolved biological machine designed over millions of years to operate on very specific neurochemical fuel. When you force the machine to run on the wrong fuel for an extended period, the engine does not simply sputter, it begins to violently tear itself apart from the inside. Let us first examine the agonizing biological reality of the yin energy that has been forced to become the mountain. In the modern world, the individual carrying the yin core, the fluid, intuitive, emotional center, is often forced to wear a heavy iron armor of yang energy just to survive the corporate battlefield. They must be rigid, hyperlogical, aggressive, and fiercely independent. This is necessary for external survival, but the tragedy occurs when they bring this heavy iron armor back into the sacred sanctuary of the home, because their partner has completely abdicated the role of the structure. Because the partner will not lead, the yin energy realizes, with a profound, silent panic, that if they drop the armor, the entire household will collapse. When the yin energy is trapped in this perpetual state of hypervigilance, leading the dynamic and managing every logistical detail, the brain perceives this heavy burden as a constant state of biological threat. The sympathetic nervous system locks into fight or flight mode. The adrenal glands begin to pump massive, toxic levels of cortisol and adrenaline directly into the bloodstream. This chronic cortisol saturation performs a devastating chemical blockade. It physically prevents the body from producing oxytocin, the vital hormone of relaxation, bonding, and deep biological trust. You cannot produce the chemistry of surrender while your brain is desperately guarding the perimeter of the camp. The yin partner becomes chronologically exhausted, highly irritable, and deeply anxious. Their shoulders are permanently locked near their ears. They are praised by society as a strong, independent force. But in the silence of the night, they are weeping from sheer, agonizing exhaustion. They do not want to be the general of the army anymore. They just want to be safely held by a fortress that is stronger than their own walls. But the fortress is made of mud. Now, we must look at the tragic, silent decay of the yang energy that has been forced into passivity. Society has systematically shamed the penetrating, dominant, and territorial nature of the yang core, labeling its natural protective instincts as toxic. To comply with the modern demand for absolute equality, the individual carrying the yang core learns to shrink. They bite their tongue. They refuse to make definitive decisions to avoid being called controlling. They become endlessly accommodating, stepping back into a passive, yielding state to maintain a superficial, cowardly peace in the house. But we must look at the devastating chemical cost of this surrender. The yang biology is fundamentally driven by dopamine and testosterone. Dopamine is not merely the chemical of pleasure, it is the molecule of the hunt, of the pursuit, of overcoming resistance, and of conquering territory. Testosterone is the hormone of effort, structure, and protective drive. When the yang partner abdicates their leadership, when they stop planting their feet in the ground to hold a firm boundary, their biology registers a catastrophic lack of purpose. If there is no mountain to hold, the biological muscles of the mountain begin to atrophy. The testosterone levels plummet. The dopamine receptors starve. This is why so many modern individuals carrying the yang core sink into a heavy, dark apathy. They become passive spectators in their own lives. They retreat into the numbing distractions of video games, endless digital scrolling, or substance abuse. They are like a magnificent, dangerous lion that has been locked inside a sterile concrete zoo, fed pre-cut pieces of meat exactly at noon every day. There is no hunt. There is no danger. There is no territory to defend. The lion is perfectly equal, perfectly safe, and entirely dead behind the eyes. When you combine these two biologically poisoned entities in the same house, you witness the absolute death of physical intimacy. Intimacy is not a logical negotiation. It is the ultimate raw expression of magnetic polarity. The physical act of love requires absolute profound surrender from the yin and absolute grounded presence from the yang. But how can the yin biology surrender its body if its nervous system is completely saturated with the cortisol of survival? You cannot biologically yield to a partner whom your primitive brain perceives as weaker or more passive than you. The body simply will not allow it. It feels completely unsafe. And how can the yang biology summon the powerful, penetrating fire of desire when its dopamine has flatlined and it has spent the entire day apologizing for its own existence? You end up with two perfectly equal board members sitting on a bed, fundamentally incapable of generating a single spark of electricity. The relationship becomes a barren desert. You may love each other deeply as friends. You may respect each other as co-parents or financial partners, but the magnetic core of the Earth has gone entirely cold. You cannot fix a biological burnout with more communication. You cannot talk your way out of a chemical deficit. You cannot sit at the dining table and rationally negotiate the return of your magnetism using a spreadsheet of equal chores. To resurrect the dead battery, you must make a radical, terrifying shift in your energetic architecture. You must completely abandon the modern illusion of sameness. You must be willing to step back into the terrifying, magnificent asymmetry of nature. One of you must become the mountain, and one of you must become the ocean. And to achieve this, you must cross the final, most dangerous psychological threshold of human connection. We must face the terrifying fire of the law of sovereign surrender. In the modern sociological dictionary, the word surrender has been completely corrupted. Society has aggressively taught you that to surrender means to submit, to lose, to be conquered, and to become a weak, subjugated victim. Therefore, the modern, hyper-independent ego violently fights against the very concept of yielding. But the sovereign mind understands that in the ancient martial arts, in Daoist philosophy, and in the deep physics of the universe, surrender is absolutely never a weakness. Surrender is the ultimate, terrifying apex of power. To understand this, we must look at the true nature of yin surrender. Water is the softest, most yielding, most formless element on the planet. It has no structure of its own. It surrenders to whatever container holds it. And yet, given enough time, the soft, yielding water cuts through solid titanium and carves the magnificent Grand Canyon out of rigid, impenetrable rock. Water does not defeat the rock by fighting it. It defeats the rock by completely surrendering to its own flowing nature. When the yin energy, when the woman or the partner carrying the flowing core, surrenders the obsessive need to control the logistics, the schedule, and the rigid structure of the dynamic, they are not becoming a slave. They are unleashing their true, devastating power. By intentionally dropping the heavy, exhausting yang armor, the yin energy gains absolute, unquestionable dominance over the heart, the emotional weather, and the spiritual atmosphere of the empire. To have the visceral courage to look at your partner, drop your shield, and say, "I trust you to lead this. I am letting go of the control," is an act of supreme biological magic. In that exact fraction of a second, the cortisol immediately drains from the yin bloodstream. The adrenal glands power down. The oxytocin floods the nervous system. The yin partner finally exhales a breath they have been holding for years. They regain their radiant, chaotic, life-giving depth because they are finally safe enough to simply exist. But this magnificent surrender is entirely impossible without the absolute devotion of the yang. Society has equally corrupted the concept of yang leadership, falsely equating it with toxic tyranny, oppression, and selfish dominance. A tyrant rules to extract resources to feed his own fragile ego. But a true king, a true sovereign mountain, leads through absolute agonizing servitude. To step into the yang polarity is not to demand blind submission. It is to voluntarily step forward and ask for the heaviest burden in the universe. It is the absolute willingness to stand at the heavy iron gates in the freezing rain so the ocean can rest peacefully inside. When the man, or the partner carrying the yang core, steps forward and says, "I will take the responsibility of this decision. If it fails, the financial, logistical, and emotional failure rests entirely on my shoulders. Rest your mind. I have the perimeter." He is not oppressing his partner. He is offering the ultimate biological sanctuary. He is giving the yin nervous system the exact safety it desperately requires to melt back into its natural magnetic state. He is becoming the unshakable rock. And in return for carrying this immense, heavy burden, his biology rewards him. His testosterone spikes. His dopamine ignites. He regains his deeply ingrained biological purpose because he is finally operating as the protector and the architect he was born to be. But here is the exact coordinate where 99% of modern relationships completely shatter. To achieve this magnificent, electrifying polarity, you must completely assassinate your modern pride. You must stop keeping score. The modern relationship has devolved into a miserable corporate transaction. You keep a meticulous ledger of exactly who washed the dishes, who spent more money, and who made the last compromise. You are operating like two accountants negotiating a merger, desperately terrified that someone might be giving 1 ounce more than the other. A battery does not keep a ledger of which pole is working harder. The mountain and the ocean do not argue over who is more valuable to the coastline. Their value is absolute, unquestionable, and infinite, precisely because their functions are completely different. You cannot have equality of function and magnetic polarity at the same time. You must choose. The modern ego is obsessed with identical function. You would rather sit in a dead, freezing, miserable house, exhausted and deeply resentful, simply to prove the ideological point that you are exactly equal to your partner, than sacrifice your fragile pride to be radiantly, magnetically alive in a polarized union. You have chosen the boring, suffocating safety of a flatline over the terrifying, beautiful risk of the spark. I know the exact, crushing weight of the iron armor you are wearing. I know the profound, lonely exhaustion of trying to be everything at once. I know the quiet, desperate tears you have shed in the shower, carrying the overwhelming burden of trying to be the structure, the flow, the general, the nurturer, the heavy rock, and the chaotic storm. You were sold a catastrophic, poisonous lie that having it all meant you had to do it all. You successfully built the perfect, equal partnership that society demanded, and you were left feeling entirely hollow, starving for a magnetic force that could finally match your depth and allow you to rest. You did not fail because your love was weak. You did not fail because you were broken. You failed because you were fighting a futile, exhausting war against the absolute, unshakable physics of the universe. The era of the dead battery is officially over. The illusion of identical sameness has been burned to the ground. You have learned the devastating cost of the short circuit, the magnificent necessity of the mountain and the ocean, and the toxic neurobiological poison of role inversion. And you have faced the ultimate, terrifying fire of sovereign surrender. You are no longer a victim of a sociological experiment. You are the sovereign architect of your own energetic empire. So, I leave you with one final visceral reality to confront as the screen fades to black and you return to the heavy machinery of your life. Tomorrow evening, when you turn the key in the lock and step over the threshold into the sanctuary of your home, who exactly is the entity crossing the door? Will you pick up the heavy, exhausting ledger of equality, fighting a bitter, endless war of attrition to prove that you are exactly the same as the person standing across the room? Or will you possess the terrifying, visceral courage to finally lay down your heavy armor, step fully into your sovereign pole, and let the raw, ancient magnetism of nature resurrect your empire? The choice is yours. The path is open. Ami tuofo.